Welcome again. We are now coming into the Next Generation Funds with the will to understand their limits and their possibilities and to help them our challenge to the right of housing with dignity. We will do this together with who was supposed to come, Carme Trilla, president of the Metropolitan Observatory of Housing in Barcelona, but Anton Gasol will be substituting her because she wasn't able to make it in the last minute. So he will be speaking about that. We will also count with the presence of Javier Burón, housing manager of the City Council of Barcelona, Elsa Ibar, director of the Next Generation programs from the Catalan government, David Guàrdia, from AVICOP, the Federation of Catalan Housing Cooperatives and Housing Sector of the Solidarity Economy Network, and Irene Escorihuela, Director of the Observatory of Social, Cultural and Environmental Rights, will be moderating the panel. Let's give them a round of applause. Hello to everyone. As you can see, the Next Generation Fund panel has arrived. I'm not an expert in the subject, so I'm expecting the different public administration representatives to be talking about it in a more informed way, our guests today. However, I do think that from a social perspective, from the entities defending the right to housing, it is important to talk at the Next Generation Fund because sometimes there's technical issues that are not easy to understand, and the municipalities have often found it hard to find information in detail about what this will entail. So expectations have been created in different places. So involvements and opportunities will be discussed in this panel concerning the Next Generation Funds and what these could bring to our society. As you know, we've been undergoing a housing crisis in the last years with evictions, rent crisis, occupation, squatting problems, and the pandemic. And we've seen here a moment for a possibility of change through rehabilitation and creation of public housing stock for rent. In the beginning, when we started speaking about Next Generation Funds, a lot of stress was being put on rehabilitation, and it is an important point about it, but it's not the sexiest one, maybe. So the funds should also contribute to a bigger housing stock because it's one of the main challenges that we have in terms of housing. The European Council Commissioner was just here, and she was mentioning the need of funding and investment for the Barcelona city to have as much of a public housing stock as the other cities in Barcelona, so that housing rights of the citizens will be fully protected. So this is a session to lift our eyes up to the Next Generation Funds and the expectations they entail. This is a semi-institutional space where other social and private entities are participating, and this is where we made the first appeal from the Catalan government so that this housing, public housing financing could be tackled. In the plenary session, we discussed the importance of communicating what are the funds, how can we obtain them, how can we access them. We've heard about them, but there isn't enough knowledge about it. The public administrations are therefore carrying out the dissemination work about it to explain who can access these funds, how to do it. And this is a great opportunity. Probably one of the pending challenges regarding these funds. Now I will first give the floor, and I'll change the order in the program. We'll start with Elsa Ibar, Director of the Next Generation Funds from the Catalan government, so that she can give us the Catalan perspective of the issue. After her, we will hear Javier Burón, and after him, Anton Gasol, who is here on behalf of Carmen Trilla, and finally, David Guàrdia. Thank you very much. So, Elsa Ibar, you have the floor. Thank you to the City Council for giving us the opportunity to participate in this conference. As Irene was saying, communication is a big element, and in making this happen, I will give a general overview of the Next Generation Funds. After that, I will focus on the Catalan case. And after all we have spoken, we will probably see that the organization and the communication of the Next Generation Funds will be a key aspects to allow us to take this chance, to take this opportunity and really make it happen. I would like to start by saying that Next Generation Funds are a great opportunity. In this case, housing opportunity. As such, administrations must do all they can to make it happen. The main challenge that we are finding is not to make the most of them. With the COVID, Europe launched a resilience plan for economic reactivation through a series of goals. I don't have time to explain them in detail, but each member state was to write a plan, and that plan for recovery, transformation and resilience was a plan where 10 axes are defined, and these 10 axes are made up by 30 components. The second of these components is precisely rehabilitation and construction. In the beginning, it didn't seem that they were going to be a part of it, but Carmen Trilla, who finally couldn't come today, was one of the people who made it possible so that some of these funds would be dedicated to social rent and public housing. This general recovery plan is made up by 140,000 million euro. In the overall, 3.5 billion overall for Spain, and 145 billion overall. 160 million of this for rehabilitation, and then those for construction would be 1 billion, of which 160 million will be used for Catalonia. Within this framework, what Europe says is, you've come up with this plan, you have these resources, and with these resources you need to attain certain objectives. And it's a bit more complex than this, but just to sum it up, the objectives are set with certain timelines. But certain mechanisms have timelines which go up to 2026, for example. But in the case of Catalonia, we're talking 350,000 housing units. And if we achieve this milestone, we'll have this much funding. Regarding the building of efficient housing for rent, in this case, the objective, and I have the figures here, 3,200 new housing units, of which in Catalonia, finally, it would be 3,200 housing units. How is this structured? With a real decree written at the level of the states, defining 5 rehabilitation program and 1 construction program. This real decree is what we all use at the level of Catalonia, and we have 2 consortiums, the Metropolitan Consortium of the metropolitan area of housing and the Housing Consortium of Barcelona, and the Catalan government is also present in the second one. The Catalan government is passing some of the resources on to these consortiums. Both consortiums and housing agents have a real decree, which is our legal framework, which are the grounds for every action that we are undertaking and that we are bringing forward. It is a very complex thing to do. This is European money. If you have worked with federal funds, you know about the level of the demand in terms of justification of expenses that this entails. And the real decree is quite a tight frame. However, we all are playing along based on the same game, rules of the game. There's a program that is called Neighborhoods, Barris, and this program is meant to work alongside with the city council so that city councils will identify certain spaces called environments, residential environments, and once they are defined and identified, owners, communities, or public housing stocks, a series of fields of action will be defined. How are these different from Program 3? Program 3 is about buildings. Buildings, which means the rehabilitation of a whole building. One of the main goals is energetic efficiency, and I maybe skip that because we all take that for granted. But rehabilitation should meet certain energetic efficiency criteria that will entail the reduction of the percentages of subsidies. So we have some money, we have some resources, and we have some goals to be met. And in the end, the subsidies that you're offering the user should stand between certain parameters which should be compatible with the end goals in order for them to be more efficient and in order for the citizen to really benefit from these actions. The main thing is to meet the goals, and also that would mean not receiving the financing from Europe. So they will never give you the money in advance. Once goals are met, the money is awarded. The neighborhood goal has to do with the fact that these funds, and there are certain inconsistencies here, and they should be destined to vulnerable families. Therefore, we're talking about buildings in bad states, which have greater needs, and there are certain special aids or subsidies for this, with also certain limits. And I don't think I'll have time to explain it all. The minimum percentage that is asked for in terms of energy reduction is a 30%, but there are different levels. There can be 30%, 40%, 60%, even up to 80% energy reduction. If the whole rehabilitated building stock were to achieve a reduction of the 80%, we wouldn't have enough resources to cover for everything. So this is a starting decalage that is posed from the real decree. This is the program that is mainly thought so that city councils will be able to define the more vulnerable sectors. And this is what these stocks are thought for, the stocks that are in worse conditions. The other kind of program has to do with roofs, closings, facades, and then program 4 has to do with housing as well. And something that gets on my nerves is when people say, change your windows and you will get NextGeneration Funds. Well, yeah, true, but not as simple as that, as it sounds. So a lot of frustration is generated when a neighbor comes up to us and says, I changed my windows. Am I going to? Well, it's not just changing the windows. There has to be documentation and there has to be certain requirements that have to be met. And there's an added complexity to this. There are two more programs, 5 and 2. Program 5 is meant to give incentives to projects that would later move on to be programs 3 or 1 programs, and the books of the building. Program 1 has to do with allowing us to design a structure in order to help all of these funds to move forward. Rehabilitation offices are being planned, which will be financed by these funds, so that a structure and network will be established in order to make it easier, or this procedure to make it more agile and easier, so that everything will be well tested. For each rehabilitated block of buildings, we'll have to justify that the reduction of energy consumption will have to be justified for, will have to be documented for. Professional associations and local associations are important agents in the networking all around the territory. They are also key pieces in this network. So the local offices are numerous. There are more than 100. Around 70%, 69 of them have become involved in the project. And we also have the two consortiums, the Barcelona consortium and the Metropolitan consortium, which are joining the project, and the professional associations like the Real Estate Administration Association and the Architect Administration, the Architects Association are involved in the project as well. Local offices are in charge of the paperwork, and they are direct mediators with the citizens, because they are the ones who know about the particularities of the territory. This is why I'm always insisting about offices on the territory for the deployment in the territory of the project. And there's another action that we have brought for, which is an agreement that has been done with the banking entities, the main 10 banks, so that the whole operation will be financed for the also the non-subsidized plan, so that the rehabilitating agent foreseen in the royal decree will be used. And the banking entities will be able to carry out that financing. I think I've overstepped my time, but I would just like to quickly mention Program 6. In this case, the goals and the funds have not been transferred to the consortiums. The Agency of Housing is managing all of this program. This is construction on public land, but it could also be association, a public or private association, but the land must be public. The bids are all out. In the case of Program 6, a first call has been made, just like we did with Barris. There are about 38 municipalities in Barcelona which have destined some funds to bring that program forward. And then regarding Program 6, the first resolution has come out where a list of candidates has been published. We have exceeded the resources, so we need to make a list of priorities so that those who have better punctuation can come in, and in this order, in order of the list. I suppose we'll have some more time to discuss this or debate on this and to be hopeful about it and to discuss maybe the things to be improved and the points that we can work on. Thank you very much. I think really it is a complex issue. And the challenge of spending the funds, I think you explained that well. And there will be questions later. So yes, we can go back to some of the ideas. I will now give the floor to Javier Burón, Manager of Housing in the City Council of Barcelona. Sure. I will leave it where Elsa... I will take it from where Elsa left it. We have different programs for different issues. My considerations will be about Barcelona mainly. Some general considerations. This is an opportunity, Elsa was saying. It's true, because the European Union decided that they want that part of the exit from this crisis should be Keynesian. Demand and offer and debt. This had never happened before. This is a double opportunity, a local opportunity, also in a context which I particularly, as public policy worker, I think is interesting. We need to see what the level of opportunity is representing. 5 billion euro coming from Europe is a lot of money, but also we need to see it in its context. There has been no social housing program having been generated from a public and private initiative. 12 billion euros is actually what we need. It's 5 billion, not 12. So yes, it's a lot of money, but I think context is important. One every 4 years, out of 4 years, is going to be used for new buildings, and 4 out of 5 for rehabilitation. This is what the Spanish state has decided. Every action has advantages and disadvantages. But our colleagues from the European Union don't understand anything when they speak to us. Because basically, in the rest of the states in the European Union, rehabilitated of public housing for rent has been priorities, which means that they have rent, public housing stocks, and they need a rehabilitation. In our case, I understand it's we don't have a lot of public stock of housing because it's mostly private stock of housing that we have. But there could be more as well. Regarding the 1 billion euro destined for new buildings, in the case of Catalonia and Spain, this is translated into protected housings, which have low rents, can receive very juicy subsidies. And seeing this from the outside, it could be a very favorable context. But our problem now is that for all of us who are working on protected housing is financing. Our situation right now is basically based on Euribor +2, beyond the interest rates that people usually work with. And this is a serious difficulty. And there's a technical issue as well. There's a fiscal penalization for public institutions which are using public land for affordable rent housing stocks. Right now, it is a paradox, but when there's more money than usual on the table, a lot of the projects end up being stopped. Machines that were already working, like ours, with rent-protected housing together with cooperatives and associations, in a context where a lot of resources seem to be there, there is a kind of stopping, and we hope it's just a short pause. But last week, we heard about the decision from the Catalan government with a list of the projects that will be falling in and projects that will be excluded. We understand what is wanted, which is there will be enough distribution on the territory so that it will have a good infrastructure all along the country, so that there will be a capillarity. But if the resources is put in the hands of non-mature projects, which have to start from scratch, the risk we are facing is that this will leave without resources those who already have projects that are starting and that are already working and who are really capable of bringing that out. The danger of this, or the risk of this, is that some of these projects will never see the light. So this is a problem that we have. It's up to me to appeal to the capacity Barcelona has as a city, also the metropolitan area. This is why we have presented 43 projects for the next generation promotion for 1,500 housings. Barcelona could comply with 90% of the goal. It won't be reasonable that projects from cooperatives, foundations, and the city council in the metropolitan area won't have enough resources, bearing in mind that they have the most mature projects concerning new rent-protected housing and rehabilitation. Many colleagues from the Spanish state, are promoting the reformation of the private stock of housing. A lot of the people we know want to do things well, but there is a problem with the administration of extra funds in order to rehabilitate neighbor communities. In the case of Barcelona City, where we are sharing a consortium, everything is improvable, but in the last years, from 2015 to up to 2021, we have invested 180 million to rehabilitate 150 housing units. These funds are reaching a machinery that is already moving with a lack of balance in its financing. This lack of balance will be compensated partly by the European funds. Buildings, houses, neighborhoods practically don't have any adjustment problems or issues. The problems that were already there regarding inner elements fit well with the existing projects. The Catalan government is asking us to have a greater managing capacity. The feeling we're getting is that we're doing our homework. We have created an office especially dedicated to rehabilitation only, and it may seem quite specialized, but there are few departments in the city council working together alongside with this new office, with some new teams, with people who will go to the territory to explain the programs. These are called the prescribers, and then the Department of Urban Planning will renew licenses for rehabilitation, and we know this is one of the bottlenecks. And I don't know if we have launched it yet, but there's a simulator so that the neighbor communities will know what they have when they are entitled to. And we will make mistakes like everyone else, but we have the feeling that we've more or less done our homework. Risks or challenges? Everyone is talking about the risk of non-execution. I think in the city of Barcelona there is no risk of non-execution. At least this is not the main risk. Other people are talking about a certain risk of social economical bias, which means that wealthier neighbor communities will be accessing funds more easily. Yes, this is a risk. But we believe that this is a risk, only partly a risk, because we believe that resources will go intensively to certain areas in the territory which need it more. But this will have to be monitored, and we will have to see if this risk is really being avoided. Another risk that is not so hard is that there's a disconnect with rent. European funds are not conditioning what happens to the tenants. This can only be done through public funds. I remember the bid that is in vigor right now has 41.5 million, but this is a distortion. Tenants will only be benefited from the municipal funds. Another risk that we all can see is anorexia and bulimia. There are a lot of extra resources right now. What happens when these extra resources don't disappear? Will force the system to generate certain capacities with capillarity. How much of that can we maintain? Finally, and we've dedicated a big part of the morning to this, in questions like industrialization of rehabilitation, public or private project generation, the generation of funds to lost non-refundable and sunk costs. This is leaving the most residues. Public or private initiatives, if they are well financed, they have the capacity to do things, but when there are no longer European funds, they will still be able to do things. This is the problem. Who can continue working on this when there are no longer European funds? I would like to finish where I started. I do think this is an opportunity. I do believe that we are going to make the most of it. But there are risks along the way and things that we need to watch out for. I believe this is something that we just need to be aware of.
Thank you, Javier. So adding challenges, I mean, the opportunity is clear, but adding the challenges, how these funds can reach the more vulnerable houses, and what we do once the extra funding is no longer available. It's very interesting. So now we'll move on to the social side. We will start off with David Guàrdia, who's come from Davicop, which is a federation of Catalan housing cooperatives, and in the housing section of the CHES. The floor is yours. Well, I'll try keeping it short so we can have a discussion In any case, we have a federation of housing cooperativists in the region of Catalonia. We are moving forward in this logic to pay stable long-term rents, and that has to do go through cooperative housing. And in the CHES, we are strongly committed to changing the economic model and to in a context of change. So we want to push social solidarity economy. We want services and around housing that will allow for an economy that is rooted in the territory with a high return. That is why CHES, the Network of Solidarity Economy of Catalonia, is a powerful network. I mean, in the classic societies of the construction of real estate, they say housing generates 2.4 jobs. But we think that with these next generation funds, so that they are pushing for social and affordable housing, well, we think they should be used to strengthen all of the goods and services around construction and housing. Having said that, and based on what Javier was saying, in the sense that it's good news that generally speaking they're pushing for more investment in a crisis or in a context of crisis, like a Keynes model, to compensate for the hardships that may come from the existing economic situation. That's generally speaking good news, because obviously we support strengthening public services and strengthening everything that is of a general interest, public management and of the public goods, and this public community dimension, especially when citizens participate, as in the case of housing co-ops. Going into the construction and renovation of things is that beyond this good news in terms of concept, we also want to share and say that since we are talking of a large investment, this can lead to distortion. So we want to raise some flags that civil society organizations have mentioned, such as the Observatory for Debt in Globalization or the Open Generation European Union platform, who have warned on the need that it's not large corporations, shouldn't the funds, the next generation funds, shouldn't all go to large corporations. They should be an opportunity to increase transparency with regards to subsidies, to strengthen public services, and in the case of housing, for public housing and for public community models instead of public-private partnerships with a strong market orientation, and to strengthen the ecosystem of SMEs, social solidarity economy, so that we can scale it up. So it's an opportunity that in general and also in this sector we must be aware of. Having said that, in the field of new constructions, we've seen something curious, and that is that, as Javier was mentioning, with just to give you a concrete example, even if there are more funds available, the calls in Catalonia with municipal funds, we're still waiting for the resolution of a case where you have mature projects that have been left out. So the year when you have much more money available, it's the first time where mature projects have been left out of these subsidies. They wanted to come up with a strategy to create demand, so they have these millions, they want to waste them quickly, and they've prioritized. I mean, many city councils that up until now hadn't done much in an initial stage, based on a series of commitments, have been given greater scores for projects that are than projects that are at a more mature stage. So this creates a dysfunction with regards to the different stakeholders and the maturity level. There are certain stakeholders perhaps who up till now hadn't considered these type of actions, but then there are operators and actors that have been doing things and haven't been able to access this support. We know it's difficult to strike a balance, and that next generation funds should be used so that territorially and strategies we can broaden them. But what isn't acceptable is that these funds can't be used to strengthen things that are already mature. Another paradox is that when you give a subsidy, there's always a positive and a negative side. For new constructions, the public administrations, even if they want to collaborate with a community actor or private actor, have been able to request the subsidy in an initial stage, so you can grant the land with a financial subsidy. But on the other hand, in city councils around the metropolitan area of Barcelona have built social housing with a private cooperator, and it may be possible that you have city councils today who have had a subsidy but who then partner with a private actor which generates social housing, yes, but then it is a surplus which doesn't go into the hands of social actors but rather are put on the market. And this is also something that worries us. Now, when it comes to renovation, there's the positive side. That is an opportunity to renovate the existing housing stock. And as was said earlier on, we understand there's not enough differentiation, as Javier was saying, between the private side and the public side. Here we believe there should have been a positive discrimination towards non-profit projects, and that isn't happening in the way we would have liked this to happen. So it's about renovating the existing stock, and it's also an opportunity to strengthen community and public actors. We need to support them so that we can move closer to the European affordable social housing models through cooperatives and non-profit organizations that can add on to the public stock. And the main difference we see with the Catalan government and the state of Spain is I'd like to call on all administrations, and in the field of renovation, we think this differentiation between renovating private park or renovating public stocks, we need to clearly differentiate these points. And it's very positive to see that ICAIN subsidies from the regional government of Catalonia, which do differentiate. There are subsidies for energy transition where they differentiate subsidies that are given for non-profit actors from when it's a commercial entity, where the subsidy by kilowatt is much higher, because any benefit that is achieved through this energy transition will revert to the non-profit activity of the organization. So we think this same logic should be applied by the state, the regional government and the city council to the next generation funds used for renovation. And a last idea is that local administrations sometimes can complement. I mean, sometimes there are limitations in the calls, for instance, with the next generations, but local administrations, especially larger city councils, could complement these next generation funds so that there could be this positive discrimination to add on to the subsidies and to promote housing cooperatives run by non-profit organizations. Last but not least, I know I'm expressing many concerns, but the challenge is great, big ahead of us. Since socially speaking, we share the general positive overview, but there is also a need to think of potential risks. And the logic of funds that are available only up till 2026 will mean that it all has to be done now. There's a sense of urgency. There are projects that are in a very initial stage and can't access these funds, and people are asking what opportunities there'll be further on down the line for this model to grow and consolidate. And you need a clear, a stable framework, and we can't see what we've seen recently where the subsidy frameworks have changed from one year to another. Last year it was the Spanish state, then it was the Catalan government, and for next year we don't really know what will happen. And as in all administrations, it's difficult to know, strike a balance. So, when you don't have this stability and when there's this sense of urgency, it's very difficult to make long-term plans to strengthen the social affordable housing stock. We're talking a lot about housing policies, but we could also include next generation funds that could benefit us, such as those linked to repopulating rural areas, or just to give you another example, using support to new projects for co-housing, for elderly people with shared spaces and shared services. We think we need to make greater efforts to subsidize and fund these new models that can help the social services evolve, where you have housing that go together with social services. That would be all on my side. Okay, so yes, you're sticking to time excellently. And David was highlighting the idea that there are opportunities, and maybe there'd be an opportunity to strengthen public services, but raising many red flags. I think it was quite interesting, and I'm sure we will be able to talk about this in the discussion. You were mentioning, David, this paradox with the projects that will be funded through the Next Generation Funds, and how important it would be to prioritize public community alliances instead of public-private initiatives, and how everything is in the short term and we don't know what will happen once the Next Generation Funds are over. So we'll now give the floor to Anton Gasol. Sorry, I pronounced your name wrong. So Anton Gasol, we were told, we were sent a short bio. The former Dean of the Department of Economy and the Director of Habitat 3 Next Generation Funds. Did I say it right? No, Habitat 3 is Carme Trilla. No, please do correct me if I'm mistaken. Well, first I want to apologize because Carme Trilla was going to be, who is the chair of Habitat 3, but for a last-minute family emergency, she couldn't come. And they took me as a cover, and I got here late. So the first thing I want to do is apologize for my delay, but I wasn't able to make it here sooner. I'd also like to welcome the fact that the Housing Forum has organized a panel like this. I think it's something that is welcome. I am sorry I wasn't able to listen to Elsa Ibar from the Catalan Regional Government. As I'm Anton Gasol, I'm more than the former Dean of the Borough of Economists. I'm the patron of AFIPS, the Foundation on Family and Wellbeing. It's a long-standing foundation with a long history. And I'm also collaborating with Cohabitat, which is an association bringing together 12 private foundations promoting social housing for rent. I'm sorry I didn't make it in time to listen to your presentation, Elsa. I did hear Javier's speech, the end part of his speech, and David Guàrdia's, and until now, and apologize because maybe I'm not the one who knows most on social housing, but from what I know and from what I've heard up till now, social housing was done with funds of the regional government or the city councils, together with subsidies, and developers are private and they've put in their own resources, have taken on debt. So it is a system which has worked well when it works with public funds or subsidies or a mix of both. And today, in the few minutes I have, I would like to talk of a shift in paradigm. We're talking of next generation funds, but if I'm not mistaken, we are only talking of subsidies, which, if you give me 2 minutes, what are the next generation funds? Next generation funds are an example of European solidarity as we'd never seen before. COVID unleashed the fact that the European Union says we need to get working for the damage caused by COVID to overcome it. And they've done what something they resisted to do, especially Germany, to issue European bonds, that is, issuing debt, and it'll be Europe issuing this debt. And they said, we will allocate 750 billion euros to recover from COVID. And these 750 billion euros will be shared among the member states in the form of grants and loans. How will these funds be distributed? Well, this is an example of European solidarity. They will be shared based on a set of criteria that were set, and that is that states that saw a greater drop in GDP and higher levels of unemployment, which are in a least favorable situation, will be allocated more funds, whereas countries that are better off will receive fewer funds. So the distribution of these funds is based on the impact of COVID. And which of the EU member states were most affected by COVID? Italy and then Spain. And when it came to the allocation of European funds to Spain, it's about 140 billion euros, more or less, half in the form of grants and half in the way of loans. So Spain has received support from the Europeans so that the grants and loans, I mean, the European Central Bank will issue bonds, and this money obviously has to be returned. How will it be returned? Well, it will be returned through own funds that the member states contribute to the EU. And these resources are contributed based on their wealth. So the richer countries, the countries that are better off after COVID, will be contributing more funds to pay the Next Generation Funds, whereas the countries that are worse off will pay less. So it's the clearest example of European solidarity as we've never seen before. And let's hope there'll be future occasions. But for now, it's the only occasion where there's been such a solidarity response. And it's shared equally between grants and loans. If I haven't got it wrong, what has been done until now is to look at how we can access these grants, 20% for construction, and this stems back a long way. And now we have the Next Generation Funds, and indeed Spain has allocated around 1 billion euros in subsidies to meet the promotion of social housing for rent. This rent, which is done on municipal soil, that will have to be returned to the owner after 70 or 75 or 80-year lease, as agreed, will be returned to the city council. And I want to talk about a shift in paradigm. Foundations and cooperatives and people building social housing are people with financial solvency and who can guarantee that they will be able to repay the loan or the money they are lent to build that promotion. And I more concretely want to talk of Cohabitat, which, as I said, brings together 12 foundations and FIBs, with which Josep Maria Puig, I can see, is in our audience. So what we say is, okay, subsidies are great, but what we are asking for is for loans. We want next generation loans. 70 billion in loans that the Spanish state can ask from the European Union. These loans are the ones offering the best possible conditions for repayment. So what we are saying is, yes, grants are great, but let's ask for loans. And for a long time, there's been a battle going on to see how we can reach out to the central government, the national government of Spain. Let me take a pause here. I mean, in Spain has done tricks here. Spain and other countries, some other countries. The European Union allocated these 750 billion euros and distributed amongst the countries. And the EU, it was a clear example of giving up sovereignty. The EU could say, if we are subscribing debt for everyone, we want to decide where these funds will be used. And they have an important task force to decide which projects could be eligible for these projects, but they didn't do this. They transferred sovereignty to the Spanish state. So here the question is, and I think the Catalan government will say I'm right, the relevant question is, so why is this transfer of sovereignty? Why hasn't Spain transferred this sovereignty to the regions of Spain? And they're only giving a bit of leeway to manage whatever the Spanish state has decided. So this transfer of sovereignty is stopped at the Spanish state, and that is why we need to go and ask for loans from the state. And then the state is the Council of Ministers, and more specifically the Minister for the Economy and the Minister for the Urban Agenda. So our struggle, what we think would be the best solution, is to receive loans. Why? Well, because the construction of social housing, at least from the perspective of foundations, we can only do this if we have 30-year funding at very low interest rates that aren't higher than 2%. Otherwise, with revenues for the usual social housing scheme, we earn 7.5 euros per square meter. How can you build social housing when you only have 7.5 euros profit per square meter? And then if you have to do maintenance, and what happens if someone squats your building? We can only do this if we can pay back the interest in 30 years and the interest rate isn't higher than 2%. And the international financial institution is taking on debt by 4.5% and then subsidizes those of us who are building social housing with 2 or 2.5%, and besides a 20% subsidy. So we're putting a huge pressure on the Catalan or the Spanish treasury with these subsidies or subsidizing interest rates. What I say is forget about that. Well, no, I can't say forget about subsidies and grants and subsidizing interest rates. Give us loans. These loans, in principle, are a 30-year maturity with a very low interest rate, only for the managing fees. So this would mean that foundations and anyone who builds social housing for rent will agree, offers the guarantees that they will pay back. And don't let anyone say, no, but if the state asks for these loans, it would be taking on debt. No, it's not national debt. And let me give you an example. With COVID, there was furlough, and the official loans institute gave out loans and has backed up financial institutions to give these loans. So public funds was made available through the ICO to help companies, and that isn't debt. And I'll tell you more. The bailout of Spanish banks of 42 billion euros, it wasn't calculated as debt. And I'll say more. Now it's been classified as debt because all of the toxic assets were put in a public bank, and it's been a disaster, and it hasn't been repaid, and so the loss is huge, and the state had to take on this debt, and the European Union said, well, if you haven't recovered it, we'll classify it as debt. But for housing, not the case, because foundations and others building social housing for rent have a track record of saying we can offer guarantees that we will pay back this loan, but only if it's in these conditions, 30-year maturity and 2% interest rate. And I'll conclude by saying that the worst scenario we can imagine would be if the state isn't able to ask for loans from the 70 billion euros. I don't know if they'll use up all of the funds allocated for subsidies, but as far as we know so far, from the European funds that were made available so far, Spain has received around 35% of the total funds it could obtain, but France, Germany, they're all above 50%, Finland are above 85%, whereas Spain isn't very efficient when it comes to using the EU funds that the EU makes available to us. So maybe the Siren funds that are being distributed, maybe they will use these, but I would go as far to saying that it will be very difficult for these 70 billion made available in loans won't be used up. And another thing is loans that you need to pay back, even if they're in excellent conditions. So what I'm calling out for here is to all put pressure from the different institutions, the City Council of Barcelona. They also wrote a subscribed an agreement, and they are standing next to the regional government and the cooperatives. We should all put pressure on the state so that it requests loans from the Next Generation Funds and makes them available to all of those entities, foundations, cooperatives and others who, thanks to the transfer of public land, are able to build social housing for rent. Everyone says that we need a greater stock of social housing. Everyone is saying this. Well, here we have a way of, instead of just talking about it, actually getting to do it. Thank you so much. Okay, thank you very much, Anton. You gave us a general overview of these funds, and I think it's clear that we need to have loans besides grants. Okay, so we have roughly 10 minutes left, time for some questions, comments and answers. I think you have an app, a new code. We see that we have some questions. I'll read 2 or 3 of them and then I'll give you the floor. I'm sure you also made comments, so maybe when I give you the floor you can answer. So first, you can see the question here, right? I'll read it out anyway. Elsa Ibar was saying that in order to reach the goal of renovation, we had to remodel around 60,000 housing. When it comes to public housing, how many will be renovated in 2023? I don't know if you want to answer quickly. Yes? Okay, so 58,000. I just gave a round figure, so it's 58,000 for 2023. By November 2023, between public and private housing units, it's 25,000. That's for the whole of Catalonia. And, well, I mean, at the end of the day, in this case, it's public and private. The goal, it doesn't specify where it has to be public or private. Okay, concrete answer to a concrete question. We, in the second resolution of Next Generation, will the Catalan government allow for an increase in rent prices of 7.50 euros square meters, moving closer to the 9.2 euro per square meter module? Well, I don't know. The call is still in the process of being finalized. Plans, I think the second call, I guess when you say the second call will be the official call. Now there's been a framework and the actual call is still being finalized. It'll be out in January in principle. Okay. And the next question. We have the energy certificates as the basis for these funds, and they don't give trustworthy information, they're not reliable. Do we need a new tool? It doesn't say who this question is addressed to, so maybe you can leave it for the final round of interventions, and we'll read another question if there are any more, or do we just have these 3? That was the last question, right? Okay, so if you agree, yes. So can we hear questions from the audience in a mic? In theory, they were meant to be asked through the app. From the organizers, they're sharing the questions with me. I don't know if there is flexibility and we can take some questions from the floor. Yeah, we have a mic. Okay, so what would be the critical pathway that a community of owners should have if they have a renovation project with an energy certificate, how can they have access to the Next Generation Funds? Bearing in mind that they already have a license, a permit, and they could maybe start works within a timeline of no more than 2 months. Okay, so we have this very concrete practical case, and we have this question on the energy efficiency certificates. And then if you want to say some concluding remarks, we'll follow the same order as before. So are we giving our closing remarks? Well, we'll take this question that was just asked, as well as the question on the energy certificate as a baseline and the wrap-up. Yeah, so it'll be your final intervention. So shall I answer everything? No, we each have the occasion to answer. Okay, so when you're asking about the critical pathway, the process you're referring to, right? Well, so if you already have a project and you meet all of the requirements, which as planned in the call, you have to submit it to the renovation officers, which are at the official professional association of architects or the real estate managers, who will check all that you have all the documents, and 1 month later you can have resolution on the granting of the subsidy. So if you have done all of the previous steps, it would be quite quick. Now, with regards to my concluding remarks, and here, because I tried giving a summary, but I was mentioning that with these loans, of course, it's everyone's responsibility, but the extremely concerned with subsidies, because the worst situation would be where you didn't have loans or grants. So what we've been saying is that we need to be able. I mean, everything can be improved, and Javier said this. We still have to do more, of course, but when we are developing the call, but what I can say, and I don't want to be pessimistic, I'm trying to be an optimist, but at present we're talking of calls that have been out since the May of month, and the general situation isn't looking bright. So of course we are limited to what is written in the royal decree, and there are some rules we need to follow. We have a timeline to meet in 2023, the midterm goals for 2023, but this is what is causing unrest. It's a very short timeline, so we need to coordinate and communicate and help. And it's also true, and I mean, I know it isn't useful, but it's not just happening here. Javier, I don't know if he said it, but if we look to other regions, we see that the situation is similar, because yes, perhaps there is this boom in funds and everything is have to do quickly, but the concept of energy efficiency for housing renovations is something we need to take ownership of. I say we, because we're talking of renovation with energy efficiency, and with energy efficiency, in the end of the day, in the present situation with regards to the financial situation and the war in the Ukraine and the general economic outlook, asking a group of owners or citizens to pay a part it is an opportunity, perhaps because years back it would be more money, but they perhaps don't have the funds. So as a summary, I think we all need to work with much greater coordination. We need to explain things better. I think there is an opportunity. There is an interest and a will. So I want to reach out to everyone, especially to citizens, owners, communities, and everyone who is interested in making these next generation funds a reality. Even if the EU Recovery and Resilience Plan is temporary, somehow it should help to economic recovery that can fuel longer-term recovery. Thank you.
Very well, thank you very much. Javier, would you like to answer to this question about the certificates and do the closing as well? Maybe not so much the certificates, but maybe the other question from the gentleman in the second row, because it is true that many neighbors communities could have that question or another similar one. And maybe I wasn't clear enough before when we said we opened a specialized office for rehabilitation on the 350 number 350 of Pujada Street. That's where we need to go first, because we will be redirecting you to one resource or the other, but there must be a common office. It's part of the consortium and common to both administrations, and there should be an entry door to all questions and doubts. Shouldn't be a bottleneck, but a catalyzer. I would like to do a more general reflection because this is a Barcelona and Catalan debate, but from the far former editions, we know that videos circulate many months after these far conferences ended all around Europe and Latin America. So knowing that we have a lot of challenges, difficulties, problems, bottlenecks, knowing all of this, I do know that we have the obligation to let people know that the autonomous government and the city government have a consortium, because this is not a common thing. The consortium is not perfect, but it's not a common thing. It's not a common consortium either. At the other end of the panel, we have cooperatives and foundations working for affordable and social housing, and they have the will to generate a system, each with their own will, perfectly respectable with different nuances. But this civil society collaborating together with social and affordable housing associations, this is not so common in other places, and this is something necessary. Professor Subrat's now a minister, has a famous sentence to say it has problems, and administrations have departments. The way to hack this is that public administrations will do things together, and they should have the intellectual honesty to know or that we are only administrations, that if we do things together with the market and the citizens, we will go further, we'll reach further. This is a system that has great potentiality. And now to the point, the main point for me. The main goal is to generate 3,000 new listed buildings for rent. We're working on a stock of 6,000. They need to be generated with a certain balanced. It wouldn't be good to meet every need only in one place. In the consortium, in the last years, we've rehabilitated about 10,000 housing units per year. Qualitatively, rehabilitation must be done in a different way. These interventions are more expensive. It should be more expensive with a greater energy efficiency, with a greater dialogue with the neighbors. So it's a more qualitative rather than quantitative challenge. And I will end with a reflection which is kind of similar to a reflection done by Mr. Gasol, bearing in mind this map of first subsidies and loans out of the billions that are will to be allocated to Spain. We have a certain amount for soft loans and a certain amount to be addressed for rehabilitation. Moreover, We must have a debate on the taxing, and an equity market must be created to the service of our projects. Also, more public-private vehicles must be created. I started by saying that there are interesting things in Barcelona and Catalonia that could be inspiring for others, but if we don't do all this scalability with private and public collaborations, the chances of anorexia and bulimia in the future will be very high. Thank you very much. David, would you like to do the closing as well? Along the thread that David was mentioning regarding the consortium, in rehabilitation, we do see that we have metropolitan management on the one hand with rehabilitation and on the other hand with new buildings. I think there must be a shared reflection so that the subsidies will go where they need to go. One of the greatest worries is that this won't be executed before 2026. In this case of new buildings, new projects should be promoted, but if they don't see the light, there we have a problem. There is a paradox. We must do it differently if we don't want this to happen. Also, I wanted to share what the new general manager of the Housing Agency of Catalonia, what she said, only 6% of the funding was destined to cooperative housing. We spent a weekend with different communities and city councils where we have shared social housing models with social and solidarity economies, community living, a very positive practice at all levels, with success international stories, but only 6% of these subsidies for this sector is not enough. They have a mature architectural project. We should take more care of it. The City Council of Barcelona should be leading this procedure. This reality should take a leap in scale, and I doubtlessly in the next months with the public administration, I'm sure we'll be able to work together in the second phase of the bid, and let's see how we can correct this and redirect this. So optimism and a proposal. Anton, would you like to close as well? After hearing Javier, if people from around Spain are listening to this, I will now speak in Spanish. I would like to give a round of applause. We would like to give a hand to the last of David's interventions because he said it very clearly. Sorry, Javier's last intervention. I couldn't agree more with what he just said. Energy-wise, NextGeneration Funds mentioned rehabilitations, which I think is really important and needs to be done efficiently, energetically speaking, but also among the conditionings of the NextGeneration Funds was social inclusion. Social inclusion means social, affordable rent, housing for rent. So apart from subsidies, we're talking about loans, which could have a lower pressure on subsidies. If conditions are as favorable as we said, not so much pressure will be possible in terms of VAT and taxing. However, the way in which they should be used is the state should ask the European Union for loans for different ends. One of them would be to give an answer to the needs of the whole of agents, foundations, public or private foundations in Spain and particularly in Catalonia, which can promote social housing. This phenomenon that is happening in Catalonia has not extended in other areas or regions of Spain. Cohabitat has 12 private foundations. They could come up with about 200, 300 social rent housing units per year. With the correct financing, we could reach 1,000 housing units. And just to make it clear, the Next Generation Funds, both subsidies and loans, are from 2021 to extend it until 2026. They are now focusing on the period of 2021 to 2023, but until 2026, loans can be asked. You can ask for a loan as if you went to the bank and the bank give you a current account vehicle through a financing agency such as the Catalan Finance Institute or any other financial agency, and it were distributed when a cooperative or foundation or any organization meets all requirements to access that, they will access this account with a credit available, and I am in charge of paying it back. Therefore, it is very important, highly important, to convince the Spanish state that social inclusion and loans have to go through this, because this would give a solution for the lack of public stock of housing for rent. Okay, thank you very much. We are leaving it here. We've heard about potential collaborations between different markets, also limits and possibilities for the Next Generation Fund. Thank you for your participation. We are now moving on to the next panel, housing policies from a global perspective.
Anton, Javier, Elsa,
Anton, Javier, Elsa, Irene, David, thank you very much for your presentations, for your reflections. We hope that your role will be important in the deployment of the extension of the existing public stock of buildings, also alongside with cooperatives and social housing associations.